My name is Jason J. Rock Houston, and tonight this is Under Influence, and we're talking with my good friend Gar Borras. Gar, you of course are the lead singer for Appetite for Destruction, which is obviously a Guns N' Roses tribute based out of the LA area. How you doing tonight, Gar?
I'm doing fantastic, Jason.
And like I said, obviously you're the lead singer of a Guns N' Roses tribute. And the band being named Appetite for Destruction, I thought it'd be cool if we talked a little bit about why Appetite for Destruction had such a huge influence on you. I mean, going back to, can you share with us how you first, heard the band Guns N' Roses?
Well, back in the days when I used to do original music in LA, Guns N' Roses was playing the same clubs that I was playing at, and there was a lot of times that, other bands that Slash had been in, Black Sheep and, stuff like that. They were playing at places that I used to play at, and I would see them on the bill, and it's just, there was a big magazine that every rocker in LA had to have as soon as it came out. It was called BAM magazine.
Oh yes, I remember. I used to pick that up every week at the local warehouse, which was a record store. What is that? You remember those back in the day?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, every musician that was playing in LA was, grabbing for that magazine because it just had everything to do with what we were all doing at that time. And I even in the early '80s, I would I tried to collect them because I thought that sometime in the future that they might be something that would be collectible. But just being the knucklehead that I was, I wound up, tossing them and not keeping them, and I regret it to this day because there was a ton of bands that used to, put their ads in there with their band pictures and all that stuff, and Guns N' Roses, even before they were signed, when they were playing in LA, they were quite a bit of a talk around town, and so many bands used to put their band picture in there, and it just seemed like every time you turned a page, there was another band with a guy with dark curly hair and a top hat on. Just totally copying Slash, and then you turn the page, and then there's another one, then you turn the page, and then there's another one. So this was all going on in LA before Guns N' Roses ever got signed.
Wow, and it's amazing too because I've heard stories that actually before he was ever in Guns N' Roses, he'd actually auditioned and got turned down for Poison. Can you imagine that? But can you imagine Poison with?
Yeah, I don't know what kind of fit that would be.
Yeah.
Because they were so kind of different.
Yeah.
But even there was even this kind of close proximity of when I used to be signed to a label back in the early '80s. There was this studio in let me see, I think it was Burbank. It was called Take One Studio.
Okay.
And we were having a label-funded demos that we were doing there, and Guns N' Roses also had done some of their recordings there, and it's just when you're it just seems like there's this big world out there, but with musicians, all of a sudden it becomes small.
And so now you said you were well aware of Guns N' Roses in the clubs before they were even signed. Did you ever actually meet any of the guys or get up close enough to shake any of their hands?
Yeah, no, I never really did. I'm sure I was either at shows where those guys would be there, or I would be at parties, because when you're playing in LA back in those days, there was a lot of parties going on.
Yeah.
And, the whole Sunset Strip was just such a trippy place to be back in those days because, say for example, nowadays when you drive down Sunset Boulevard and you see a club and then there's a large line of people, waiting to get into the club, wow, there's a lot of action going over there. Well, back in the 80s, the entire boulevard was, just completely taken over by people. So even if you never even made it into a club, there were all kinds of hot chicks all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're all over there looking for the rocker guys, and of course all the rocker guys are being dogs and looking for the girls. So even if you never even made it into a club, there's all kinds of action going out on the outside of the clubs, where it was just completely overrun by all these rockers, and it was just like that all the time.
Yeah, I mean,
even on weeknights.
I mean, it's kind of sad that the scene's not what it once was in that sense, because, I mean, I even heard recent talk that developers are trying to come in down there to where even the Whiskey and the Roxy and all that still are, and they're trying to take over that area and just move in all these condominiums, and I just hope they don't allow that to happen, because it would be really a shame if there weren't any more clubs down there.
Well, I'm in pretty tight with the House of Blues, and what they told me, because everybody announces House of Blues is closing, House of Blues is
yeah,
closing.
I heard that actually.
Like big news,
yeah.
But basically what it is there's a big hotel that wants that property, and they basically paid them a crap load of money to not renew the lease. And so now they've got a crap load of money, and they're going to reopen it somewhere else. And they've got like probably about another 2.5 years to find that location and decide where they're going to reopen it. So maybe there's a lot of threats about that, and it's really kind of sad because that's my heritage.
Yeah.
The entire, the Whiskey, the Troubadour, the Roxy, all of those places were, it was just a whole scene, inside the club and outside the club, and, it was so fun because basically if you're a rocker, you'd be there and you want to meet a chick, well, what's the best way to meet a chick? Hand her your flyer and start talking to her.
Yeah, and
what I mean?
Even like if you look at what happened with the Key Club, that was down there for 2 or 3 years, and they had some pretty good rock shows in there, and then for some reason it just kind of went away one day, and it's kind of sad to see stuff like that happen.
Yeah, it's sad, but you know how it is. It's all about money.
Yeah, let me ask you.
It really is. And back in the day, Key Club was Gazzari's.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the real hot spots. And in the early 80s, one of my favorite places was a place called the Starwood.
Oh yeah, that's one of the.
It was just, there were so many famous bands that Van Halen.
Quiet Riot with Randy Rhoads.
And all these, big bands that used to play there. They had a VIP area upstairs, and then they had the downstairs, where the rest of the rockers would be. And of course, everybody wanted to try to get into the VIP area because that's where all the, the shenanigans were going on and everything. And, but then, of course, that place has a really dark side to it. There's a really dark history to that, how it closed and everything. And all you got to do is Google Starwood, Hollywood, and I'm sure you're going to be able to find out about the dark history of that place.
Yeah, I mean,
it was such an awesome place as a musician to go, appreciate other bands.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the places where Quiet Riot got their start. Back in the day when Randy Rhoads was still with them, and they were a little more of a pop metal act than what they actually became. But that's where they got their start. So let me ask you. You bring up Band Magazine and the Sunset Strip. Were any of your bands featured in that magazine back in the day that you were in?
Well, there was a band that I was in for a short amount of time. I was the original bassist for that band. It was called Tiger, Tyger.
Okay. Yeah.
And, the band constantly was, every time there was an issue, we would be putting ads in there. But then, of course, me and the lead singer slash guitarist, would wind up, kind of having it. I've had it up to here, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we worked so good together because there was so much great creativity and so much great material being written and everything like that. But then, then I would wind up leaving, and then, and then we would wind up, back together working in another band, and then we wind up separating, and then we wind up back together in another band. And I met him back in 1980 when he had moved here from Michigan, and he was brand new from Michigan, and really talented guy named Ron Lubin.
Okay.
And so that, he was really, really well known back in the 80s. They used to call him Rockin' Ronnie. And he's still around, and we still stay in touch, and he's kind of got rid of some of the nasty habits that we all had to get rid of from that time period to survive. And he runs sound for a sound company called Starway Productions. And in fact, a week ago, he was the guy running sound for Judas Priest at I forgot what casino it is.
Yeah. Wow.
So he's really doing well, and really extremely talented guy.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier that you wish you had saved some of these magazines from back in the day, but I was curious because I seen I don't remember if it was your band Tiger like you're talking about, but I remember recently on your Facebook page I'd seen a band from a photo of one of your '80s bands, and it looked pretty old school. I was curious if you ever come across any of these old photos like that have been placed on the internet or anything. Have you found any of your old photos that way?
All that stuff is lost in the shuffle because how it is none of us really had the foresight to turn any of the stuff that we had into digital, and a lot of that stuff is lost.
Wow.
Just like a lot of the recordings that I did, from back in those days. Back in those days I was the bass player, which is one of the, I guess, most of the time the focus is always on the lead singer and always on the lead guitarist, and so I never was able to get my hands on the recordings, and now all of that stuff is lost in the shuffle. It's gone.
Would you ever have any desire? Because when I last talked to you about a year ago, you were talking about maybe putting some kind of recording together. Would you ever have any desire to go and revisit any of that old stuff, like re-record it? Or if you were going to put something out, would you want it to be like all fresh material?
I would really, really like to re-record, the songs that I personally wrote.
Yeah.
It was, basically I wrote all the music, and I wrote the lyrics and everything, and the vocal lines and everything like that. I would really, there is going to be some time in the future that I am going to want to do that. But right now, I haven't really reached a point where I'm ready because I'm so busy. I got a full-time job, and I'm a concert promoter, and I run all the business for the band. It's just like I got a bunch of hats that I put on.
Yeah, well,
you know what I mean?
that's good. That's good in a way. It keeps you busy. It means you're having some level of success at what you do now. Getting back to on that note, getting back to Appetite for Destruction, I'd like to ask you, like, so you know the band from back in the day, as far as you'd heard about them when they were just playing the clubs before they were even signed. But once you heard that album come out in 1987, and you heard Welcome to the Jungle for very first time, I mean, could you believe that was the same band that you had seen in the clubs?
Well, let me make a change to what you said. The first song that I heard, when they were starting to play it on the radio, was Brownstone.
Oh wow, okay.
And I had, that was the first thing I had ever heard, because back in those days I as a bass player, I would always be working on my chops, and one of the best ways to be creative and keep you on your toes would be to because I have a really, really strong ear. If I can hear it, I can play it.
Yeah.
And I would really exercise myself by just turning on the radio and, hear the song and immediately start playing the bass to it by ear. And it was a really, really good way for me to practice on, being creative and being able to come up with stuff off the cuff.
Yeah.
And one day, I was living in a condo in Brea with a keyboardist in a band that I was in, and I turned on the radio and I was doing that practice, and Brownstone came on. And I stopped practicing and I started listening to it, and the first thing that came to my mind was, musically, it sounded very Aerosmithish.
Yeah. And now let me ask you, Gar, by any chance, the radio station you heard that on would it have been KNAC? Because that was down here in LA. That was a metal hard rock station down here at the time.
Oh gosh, I don't remember because I would, there was 3 big radio stations back in those days. There was KMET,
KLOS,
and that's like lost. People don't even remember it anymore.
Yeah.
And KLOS, that's still around, and KNAC.
Yeah.
And back in those days, the radio, what was that? There was a radio station that was the New Wave radio
I think
station.
if it's one I think you're talking about it, I think it was called Pirate Radio.
Well, pirate radio started actually for a short time in the late 80s.
Yeah.
But it was those other stations that really was the mainstay for all the rock that was going on for the 80s. And keep in mind that back in those days, most of the time, a music genre, say like country music or different styles of music, would usually have maybe a lifespan of maybe about a 5-year popularity, and then something else would take, and it used to go in cycles. And rock would become popular, and then something else would become popular, and then over time, then something else, and then all of a sudden, rock comes back and starts being popular. Well, back in the early 80s, this whole hair band Motley Crue thing that was, becoming really a Quiet Riot thing that was becoming really popular in the early 80s. It stayed popular for the entire decade of the 80s. In the early 80s, it was very popular, kind of underground popular, and then it just stayed popular all the way until the end of the 80s, where then the record labels were putting pressure on the bands. You got to put out ballads. You got to put out ballads because ballads were selling like gangbusters. And then it just became very formulated, and it just became, oh God, you know what I mean? And then it just became time for something new to take over, and that's, I think the grunge thing started hitting about 1990.
Yeah.
But, it was really that whole, and they used to call, in the 80s, they used to call that heavy metal.
Yeah.
Now, of course, heavy metal has changed to this, a lot of this guttural stuff, and, and there's all these different genres within metal. Back in those days, metal was metal.
Yeah.
There wasn't subcategories.
Yeah. I mean, you make the point, like, a lot of those bands you mentioned I grew up on and I'm a fan of, but like by 1987 when they released Appetite for Destruction, I think that's what really made a lot of people take notice of Guns and this album in particular, because the hair metal thing became really oversaturated. When people heard Welcome to the Jungle and Guns N' Roses for the very first time, Guns was very raw, in your face, and dangerous. And So let's talk about some of these other songs. And you're saying Mr. Brownstone's the very first thing you heard. Now, what about like Welcome to Jungle? That's the obvious one to ask. That's the first single, and a lot of people, that's the song even today that they really think when they hear the name Guns N' Roses. When you heard that song, what did you immediately think?
Oh gosh, I mean, all of it was really, really impressive. To me, because I gravitated towards it just like every other rocker gravitated towards it because it for just what you described, it had that rawness, it had that dangerousness to it. It was very rebellious, and when you're young, all of those things are very appealing to the younger crowd.
And now let me ask you, Gar, because I was before I got on the phone with you, and I was reading Guns N' Roses Wikipedia, and they were mentioning that a lot of the songs like "You Could Be Mine," "November Rain," "Don't Cry," these were songs that were written early on in the band's career, and they were actually considered for Appetite for Destruction, but they decided to hold those songs for the next album for the simple fact they already had decided to go with "Sweet Child." That we got one ballad, we don't need any more. How different do you think it would have been if they had decided to put like "November Rain" on Appetite instead of going with "Sweet Child"?
I think they made the right decision by staying with "Sweet Child."
Yeah. I mean, take nothing away.
It's not a knock on November Rain, but it just seemed better suited.
Yeah.
For the later release and how it tied into that material.
Yeah. Looking at the list of songs on that album, "Welcome to Jungle," "It's So Easy," "Night Train," "Out to Get Me," "Mr. Brownstone," "Paradise City," "My Michelle," "Think About You," "Sweet Child," "You're Crazy," "Anything Goes," and "Rocket Queen." I mean, those are songs people would get a chance to see you and your band Appetite for Destruction perform if they came to one of your concerts. That's pretty much the set list.
Yes, including when we're hired to do a longer set, because now we're basically, headlining wherever we go.
Yeah.
And of course, the headliner now plays for longer periods of time. Those are the ones. "You Could Be Mine."
Yeah. Oh, cool.
"Don't Cry." You know what I mean? All of that stuff is the stuff that we do now, incorporated into the set, because it's rock stuff, and it ties in really good with what we're with the Appetite stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it does. Like you say, "You Could Be Mine." I could see that fitting in the set list, and it makes perfect sense. Having to play a longer set, you have to put more songs in there. But like, I was curious, very first time like you threw "Don't Cry" in there. Did you have any apprehension about doing so? Like, is this going to really fit in with what we do, or how did that work?
That's a really good question, because when I had never really heard "Don't Cry" until I saw them. I think it was in '92 when I think I told you in the other interview is basically there's this girl that she was really into Guns N' Roses, so I got tickets to the concert.
Yeah.
And I took her to the show and everything, and that was the first time I heard "Don't Cry." And it just it definitely is a lot mellower than the other material. And of course, me being a rocker, just like all the other guys like to rock. Girls like the pretty songs. And of course, my reaction to that song was, I wasn't really sure that song was really going to do that well for them. But now, in hindsight, what did I know?
Yeah.
The song was a huge success.
And so talk about like when you performed that song, with your band Appetite for Destruction the very first time. How did that go over with the people at your show?
Well, there's another thing. I think we interviewed maybe about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Since then, I've joined forces with a few new band members. Now I have a guy named Ozzy Arehu.
Oh, okay.
Slash.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And I have Austin still playing with But I also have Larry Cornwall, who also plays with True to Crew, and he's also the lead singer for Alice in Cooperland. He's playing drums with us now, and our next show on New Year's Eve, where we're headlining at the House of Blues in Hollywood, is going to be Larry Cornwall's debut with us.
Oh, cool,
so there
cool.
has been a change in lineup. So, I'm sorry, what was your question again? But it got me on that track that there has been some changes since the last time I talked to you.
I was asking specifically, like, when you added Don't Cry into your set, how did that go over with your audience? Were they really into it?
That's why I brought up the new members, because I'm doing it with the new members, and those guys really know it well, and so it's just like I just went into the rehearsal and it just clicked.
I mean, I think that's a cool thing to do something like that, because, as a musician, I would think you'd get into a rut, like you're saying, I'm a rocker and really love to doing the hard rock and stuff, the heavier material, but like we were just saying that, a lot of what you were originally doing was just, that whole album, basically. As a musician, I would think you'd want to throw in some new stuff and to keep it interesting. So I think it's a cool thing that you're going to be doing that.
I'm having some of the most fun right now this is a really interesting ride doing Appetite for Destruction. It really is. It's taking turns that I never really expected.
And, we were talking in our original interview that we did about a year ago, Gar, of course, when I first met you, it was through another guy you were playing with, Mano, and you had actually a couple of projects with him. You had one called, Snake Pit, and then cause you were actually covering 3 different vocalists, and then you kind of went from that into Appetite for Destruction. Were you at all surprised at how successful you've been since then, in forming your own band and that?
Very surprised.
Yeah, cause
all I can really say is very surprised. But, I've always had hope, for this kind of success, but to expect it is a completely different thing.
Well, I'm glad to see that it's turned out that way, because I want to also let people know that aren't aware of it. Besides doing the Guns N' Roses thing, I know before I ever actually got to know you that you'd done like a Soundgarden tribute. I heard that you had done a Cheap Trick tribute. So you're a guy that's been on the tribute scene for quite a while now.
Yeah, I think it's getting close to like 20 years now.
Wow, and it's interesting, that you're working with Larry. Like you said, he does Alice in Cooperland. He has his Motley Crue tribute, True to Crew, and I think Ozzy's also in that band, Ozzy Orejo. And both those bands have been on Access TV. I was curious, have you guys ever been approached about having Appetite audition for that TV show, or is that something you'd like to try down the line?
Well, we haven't been approached yet, but I'm crossing my fingers, my eyes, and my toes.
Wow. And so so your next show, I guess, is the one coming up New Year's Eve, you were saying. And I know that's a Gar Borras Presents thing where, like you said, you're a concert promoter. So are you putting on a lot more of these shows, like you said? Because it seems like a lot more of these shows that you're putting on are I've been seeing on the Facebook page.
Well, the way that we've kind of set it up is I'm basically handling all the shows that are booked through Live Nation, because Live Nation knows me really well. Now I've been doing business with them, and they're very comfortable doing business with me. But what we're doing now is Larry has put together our press kit and all of that stuff, and he's going to be shopping all of the other shows for the band. For example, festivals, casinos, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of nice because now both of us can contribute, but instead of one person doing all of that work, now we're able to spread it out over 2 people. So it just becomes less stressful.
Yeah, well, I think it's cool that you have a guy like Larry because he's been doing it quite a while, and he's quite successful at what he um, does. And now I don't know if you guys have thought about this any, but have you toyed with the idea? Alice Cooper and Guns N' Roses. They did that version of Under My Wheels. Have you guys thought about throwing that into the set and having an Alice Guns N'
All
Roses?
of it. There's all these possibilities are open, and I'm really looking at 2015 becoming an extremely busy year for Appetite for Destruction.
And so talking about like you said, you've gone through a couple of lineup changes. How hard has it been to find the right group of guys to be able to pull off what you do?
Well, I think the best example of that, not to get off track, was Dream Police.
Uh-huh.
When I was doing Dream Police, I had gone through a number of lineup changes, but then by the time it got to the last, I think, 3 years of that band's existence, because I think it lasted for about 9 years, the last 3 years were extremely successful because I had finally put together an extremely talented lineup. And mentioning that, my ex-Tiger guitarist was the Rick Nielsen for that lineup, and he did an incredibly amazing job at doing Rick Nielsen.
Wow.
And so just like that had occurred, the same thing kind of happened with Appetite for Destruction. It started out this, and then it kind of metamorphosized into another, and then it metamorphosized into another one. But basically what had happened was, we had wound up in a situation where we had to replace our Slash, and Austin had been in a Guns N' Roses tribute with Ozzy, and they were really, really good friends. And so Austin was going, get Ozzy, let's get Ozzy, and I knew that Ozzy was an extremely talented guitarist, so there was no, search or anything. It was just like, basically, hey, do you want to do it? And Ozzy, he goes, I love playing Guns N' Roses. It's one of my favorite bands. So there was just no hesitation, and he's just done an absolutely amazing job. And the other thing about it is when you get Ozzy, Austin, and our Izzy named David together in a room, it is hilarious. It's a little bit X-rated hilarious, but oh my gosh, I'm rolling on the ground. These guys are really funny.
Yeah, wow. And let me ask you, getting back to, Guns N' Roses and Appetite, I was curious, going from Appetite, for Destruction, when the very next thing they released was GNR Live, as a fan, how shocked were you to see how the other way they went on that release?
What was that? I'm not sure if I understand that question.
Well, okay, like Appetite, we were saying, the album, is so raw and in your face and just loud and a real great rock album. And then the very next thing the band puts out is GNR Live. I mean, it kind of had the live EP and then they had the acoustic tracks. It's kind of so the other way. What did you think when you saw that was the very next thing Guns N' Roses put out?
Well, I hate to say it because it just seems like I'm talking down about it, but it just seemed like, to me, my impression, I could be completely wrong, it just seemed like they were fulfilling a contractual obligation.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, like, if anybody's listened to the one side, which is the live Like a Suicide EP, that's great stuff. They got Mama Ken, and I did actually love some of the acoustic tracks, but if you look at everything the band has put out, I'm a fan of pretty much everything they put out, but let's be honest, Appetite for Destruction, there's a reason when people talk about Guns N' Roses, that's the album they point to, So the next thing I was going to ask you, Gar, is like, when the band's continuing on and you're adding more songs to your set, do you envision we'll ever see, Gar Borras pull out a piano and try to redo like November Rain or something in concert?
Well, honestly, honestly, I have never played a piano in my life,
Yeah.
and I would not want to degrade something like that.
Yeah.
I think it would be, I think it would be just better for the audience if we did that, is to reach a point where the band's budget can afford to have an actual talented piano player to do something like that justice. I think it would be, it's just not respectful to the audience to do anything that would not be of the level of what an audience deserves.
Yeah, yeah, and on that level, let me ask you, because to me, like I said, I think November Rain's a great song, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's one of the songs I love, but, and when people come in to see you and Appetite for Destruction, they have a kind of a perception of what they're going to hear. Do you care so much about, like, what's the audience going to think if we play Patience, or is that something you could see yourself doing again? Because it's just another great Guns N' Roses song.
Well, when for a while when we were doing our set, in the middle of the set, we used to do Reckless Life.
Okay. Yeah.
And one of my really, really good friends that helps me with my equipment, and I've known him for a lot of years. He's a really good friend. And he came up to me and he was saying, Reckless Life, it rocks and everything like that, but you should put something in there that is a little bit more recognizable by the audience.
Yeah.
And of course, then I start. I was going. What group? And ever since then, Patience has replaced that song in the set list.
Oh, that's cool. That's
So
cool.
we've been doing Patience in the set now for about the last half of last year, and of course that song gets really, really good reception from the audience because everybody loves the song, but everybody knows the lyrics. So I've seen video of our band, Appetite for Destruction, doing Patience, and the audience is singing the lyrics almost as loud as me, and I'm being amplified.
Wow. How cool is that? And now let me ask you, as a musician, I got to ask you, how important do you think, like, picking the right producer? Like, Mike Klink was the guy that ultimately produced the album, and what I was reading that a lot of people might not know is he had produced a lot of Triumph albums before that. If anybody who remembers Canadian legendary rock band.
Can I stop you right there?
Yeah.
Triumph is one of my favorite bands. I feel that Rick Emmett is a lost treasure from the 80s, and I feel that he is one of the greatest rock singers to come from that time period. Not to take away from all these great singers, but I was at the US Festival, and Judas Priest was there, Ozzy was there, Motley Crue was there, Quiet Riot was there, Van Halen was there, the Scorpions were there. It was just like a literal who's who, and they called it Heavy Metal Day, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, by today's standards, the only band that's really recognized as heavy metal is Judas Priest.
Yeah.
But back in those days, they called it Heavy Metal Day. Well, Triumph played at that show. And when I walked away from that concert, seeing all those great singers, Rick Emmett just blew me away, because when I went to that concert, I had it in my mind that he was never going to be able to do live what he was doing on those albums, because it was such great singing on their albums.
Yeah,
And he did it so incredibly good. Even to this day, every once in a while, I'll put it up on my Facebook. Hey, this band should not be forgotten. This band should not be forgotten.
Yeah,
Watch this video, because it's video of him singing at the US Festival, and his vocal technique, everything is impeccable.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because speaking of US Festival, I know Triumph actually a couple years ago they released like a live performance from that US Festival. They put out on CD and DVD, I think. So if you look that up, you can maybe get that. And I've actually had the privilege to interview Mike Levine, the bass player, a couple times, and super cool, nice guy, really down to earth. And the interesting thing is, a couple years ago, I interviewed him because they put out. They performed at the Swedish Rock Fest, and they put out a live CD for that. And then before that, I got to talk to him because they put out a greatest hits album. And the interesting thing about if you go and you get your hands on the greatest hits CD, is like you said, Triumph is one of these bands. They're forgotten, and they're really, I gotta say, way underrated because while I cannot like name a Triumph song off the top of my head, when I put on this greatest hits CD, it took me back to when Triumph was kind of still around back in the 80s. I put on this greatest hits CD and I thought, oh yeah, man, that's who did that song. That's Triumph. And I'd heard all the songs. I was listening to the greatest hits, obvious, but like, while I can't name a Triumph song off the top of my head, I knew every song on that CD. It's such a shame that band is so underrated and so under radar. They're really one of the most forgotten bands.
Yeah, and his lyrics are very positive and inspiring. Fight the good fight every moment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But,
Just
yeah.
There isn't like this it's very good positive lyrics, and I really like that about him.
Yeah, and
he was following his own thing instead of, well, everybody else is doing this, so I got to talk about going and chasing girls and riding motorcycles and driving fast cars, and not to knock on any of that, but he was following his own passion and expressing that in his lyrics, which I really admire.
Yeah, and the thing about it, the thing about that too is like you're saying. I mean, Rush and all these other Canadian bands, they get the accolades, but they're just one band that really, it's a shame that so many people forgot who they are, and so anybody just wants to remind Triumph, I urge them to at least get the greatest hits, and you'll probably have heard every one of those songs on the CD. Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, they did decide to go with Mike Klink and to do Appetite for Destruction, and I really feel that he really captured what they were all about. He really did.
Yeah, and the thing about it too is like you're saying. I mean, a guy that produced Triumph and then Guns N' Roses, if that was the last album he ever produced, he's pretty well set for life as far as capturing a moment in time. Because even everything Guns N' Roses has done since, that's the one album everybody goes back to. That's the one everybody cites as the most influential Guns N' Roses album.
Yeah. And there was that one EP that they did. I think it was like a Suicide.
Yeah, it was a bunch of live tracks.
That was produced by I think Spencer Proffer, and Spencer Proffer is the guy behind signing my band when I got signed in the early '80s. Some of those pictures that you've seen that I post, Throwback Thursday and all that kind of stuff. This is me back in the day. Well, it was Spencer Proffer that owned that studio called Pasha Studios on Melrose, and we just we were, what they did is they offered us a block rate where we paid a flat fee to be able to go into Pasha Studios, the same recording studio that Quiet Riot recorded all of their albums.
Yeah.
And we were recording our demos there, and they would let us come in at nighttime. We would get there at maybe about midnight and then record till like 5 o'clock in the morning. And it was just a block rate. You pay a fee, and then we would be able to go in there and do the demos and take as much time as we wanted. It was a cool deal that they offered, but we didn't know that Spencer was going in there during the day while we go home and we go to bed and sleep during the day because we were in the studio all night. he was going in there and he was listening to our recordings, and that's when he decided to sign us, and he put us together with Dana Strum, who was the bass player and producer of Slaughter's albums.
Yeah.
Dwayne Barron, that just, I mean, if you look up Dwayne Barron, I mean, he's a little who's who. Just about everything he touched went multi-platinum. And so, he put us together with them, and then we wound up doing, redoing the demos with them, and then turning it into our actual releases and stuff.
And so, what did that deal fall apart between you guys and Pasha Studios?
Yeah, it was a typical rock and roll story. I wound up getting kicked out of the band. There was a lot of stuff going up people's noses. Your typical ladies story and stuff like that.
It's actually interesting you bring that up, because another thing I was reading before calling you tonight on the Wikipedia was saying Spencer Proffer. That's probably because they did the live Suicide EP with him. He's actually one guy they also considered working with, but they decided to go with Mike Klink. And interesting story about Spencer. I also had the privilege of talking with Frankie Benelli from Quiet Riot a couple times, and he was telling me the story how the band did not want to record either of those Slade songs. That was kind of a condition of him allowing them to go into use his studio. That I want you guys to record these 2 Slade songs. And Frankie said the funny story about it. He goes, those 2 songs were probably like our biggest hits, and he said Quiet Riot got the popularity and notoriety for those songs. Slade, though, made all the money.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it just really shows you what a great band Slade was.
Yeah.
Because now, when we're talking about Slade, now we're talking about when I was a kid.
Back in the 70s,
and they were one of the first glam bands I had ever seen.
Yeah. And then
they were a great band.
And then I was also reading tonight that another producer they considered working with was Mutt Lange, and Mutt Lange's a legendary producer, worked with Def Leppard and AC/DC. But could you just imagine if he had worked on Appetite? It might be a little more polished than what it actually became.
That's my impression too. I think the decision to go with Mike Klink was the best decision they could ever make. Because not a knock on Mutt Lange, but his stuff is so slick and so polished and so layered with vocals and harmonies and all that stuff. And I just really don't see Guns N' Roses. They're better suited for the raw, the dangerous, the in your face, the rock with a punk attitude.
Yeah, and on that front, I got to ask you, Gar. Have you ever had a chance, it's been out for a number of years, of course, Chinese Democracy, have you ever had a chance to listen to any of that stuff? Is that anything you'd ever consider?
Oh my gosh, you asked me that before, back in the first interview.
I forgot.
I should be embarrassed.
Yeah.
I have not listened to it, and I should be ashamed of it, really.
I can't knock.
I got to get out from underneath this rock I'm in, because I'm so focused on what I'm doing and everything that I haven't even paid attention to it.
Well, see, the thing of it is like, that's the last thing they put out, and they haven't put out anything new since. Supposedly they're working on some new stuff. I'll be interested to see what they come up with. Now I put on Chinese Democracy. By no means is it Appetite for Destruction. To me, I put it on, and it's got some of the tunes are all right. I'm not going to say it's all bad, but it sounds more like an Axl Rose solo album than a Guns N' Roses album.
And that's what everybody else says, and I think that's in the back of my mind. That kind of makes me just kind of like, it's kind of like when you're flipping the channels on TV and you're going, you might, and then you change the channel. You just kind of bypass it. And then maybe later on, you know what I mean? It's kind of like that. Every time I come across it, I just go, what's next? You know what I mean? And I just kind of bypass it, and I really should not do that.
Yeah, and a cool thing I'd heard before, Steven Adler in interviews, he was saying, instead of calling the Guns N' Roses, he should just abbreviate double W Axl Rose and call it War. I mean, that would be such a cool name for it. But one of the last things I wanted to ask you, Gar, was you're probably aware of it. Originally, when that was released, it was released with a different cover.
Say that again?
When the album was originally released, it was released with like a different.
Oh, yeah, it was. That whole story reminds me of Spinal Tap, where the record label had a problem with the cover. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, and the I mean, classic movie for any metalhead.
It's the glove.
Yeah.
Really bad taste.
But what I
and that's what that cover kind of reminds me of, because they were so rebellious, and then there was at the time there was all this pressure from all of these religious groups to label the albums, so this has inappropriate content or something like that, and so I think Guns N' Roses wanted to do that cover because it was kind of their rebelling against all of that.
And the kind of
back at you kind of thing.
Kind of interesting thing about it is I was reading when they initially removed that cover, they took the artwork from off of a front cover of album, and they put it like on the record sleeve on the inside of the album, and then the interesting thing is, like, think how cool that is for people that have that original record cover, if you will.
Huge collector's item, yeah.
And
huge collector's item.
But at the same time, think how many people aren't even aware of it. There was that famous cover that they have now with all the band members and the skulls. I mean, that's what people think of right away, and a lot of people aren't even aware of it. There's this other album cover out there.
Well, I'm noticing recently that artwork is starting to pop up more and more now.
Yeah.
So it's kind of even that part of it, it's kind of getting a little bit of a second life recently.
Well, that's a cool thing, and let me just once again, Gar, say it's been great talking to you, and I'm really excited to hear that you got Ozzy and Larry in your band. They're world-class musicians. They've been quite successful in their own right, so I think you got a great bunch of guys in the band now, and I'm going to do my best to come out to the New Year's Eve show, and once again, thanks for doing this, and we'll have to do it again, because the last interview was really great, and I have a feeling when I listen back to this, it's going to be pretty, it's been just great talking to you tonight.
Jason, it's my honor. I'm humbled that you're asking me to even do this. I really, really mean it. You do excellent interviews. I always feel very relaxed. It's almost like we're two guys just talking and sharing our love for music and everything, and it's really, really enjoyable. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, on that note, because when I do these interviews, I'm more like a fanboy, if you will. I mean, I also write for an online magazine called Chaotic Riffs, and what I got into as far as, obviously I'm not a musician, but I still have a love of music, and I love to help support the bands that I really believe in. And the thing about it is, I didn't get into this to first of all, I'm not a musician, like I said, so for any guy that has the balls to get up on stage and perform, I got all respect for it. So for me, it's not about putting a band, interviewing a band and trying to trash a band. That's not what I got into. I got into like support the music that I love, and part of the reason I started doing these interviews with the tribute bands is because I really enjoy going to tribute shows, and there's a big misconception out there. Like we were talking in the first interview, a lot of people think, guys are playing tribute bands, they're failed musicians, they're just playing other people's music. But there's a lot more hard work and dedication goes into it, and I think people even realize.
Well, everybody's entitled to their opinion and everything like that, and
yeah.
I'm just having a blast doing what I'm doing, and really that's the bottom line for music. Is enjoying what you're doing.
And to me, like they say, success means something different to everybody. But one thing I enjoy talking to a guy like you, Gar, is you're a guy who's lived it. And what I mean by that is, while you still work in the music store and you have a 9-to-5 job, you've been pretty successful doing the band thing. Appetite for Destruction's going pretty strong the last couple of years, and you're now getting into promoting the shows and stuff. So you're a guy that actually has the ability to have a job and make a living the way you want to do, and rather than going and having some job that you hate going to. So to me, that's what success is all about.
Pinch me, bro. I feel like I'm dreaming.
Okay, well, on that note, I'm going to let you go, Gar, and we will definitely do this again. And the interview will be going on probably about a week or so, if not before. If you could just shoot me your email again through the Facebook page, I'll be sure to send you an MP3 link of this in an hour or so, and then you can listen back to it and let me know what you think.
All good, brother. I thank you so much. I really appreciate doing this interview.
And I'm glad I got to talk to you too, because I was worried about hearing that the House of Blues in Hollywood was going out of business, but you say they're just going to relocate, so that's a cool thing. So you have to keep me up to date on that, and I really urge anybody who gets a chance to go check out your show New Year's Eve.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy. The next show it's basically a fan appreciation show. This one is our attempt to let everybody that comes to these shows know how much we appreciate, and all of the bands. We're all excited, and we're gonna pull out all the stops. It's just gonna be probably the best show for all of the bands. And if I can give a shout out to the other bands, because they're all fantastic people. I've got my good buddies Ozmania.
Wow.
They're going to be playing with us, and we've got Master of Puppets, which is an incredible Metallica. Such a great job that they do. The sound and the representation, true to Metallica. We've got American Zombie. Oh my gosh, you got to see American Zombie.
Wow.
I love that band. I'm a huge fan of that band myself. I'm excited that they're doing the show. And then another good friend of mine, David Scanlon, he's got this band, Stoned Temple Pilots. Every single one of these bands are top notch, from the first band all the way to the end. So it's just going to be an absolute blast, and it's all a big, huge thank you to all the people that are fans of our bands and fans of coming to my Gar Borras Present shows. It's a big thank you to them.
And so as far as the New Year's show, is Appetite going to be the last band that goes on that night?
Yes, we're going to be we'll be performing, and then in the middle of our performance, we're going to do the countdown to midnight. It's just going to be a blast. I think about it. This is the first time in my entire life I'm going to be throwing one of the biggest parties in LA on New Year's Eve.
Well, congrats and good luck with that, my friend. And I just want to say before I let you go, finally, I'm going to reach out to the Stone Temple Pilots band, because I'd like to do an interview with them. And interestingly enough, since I interviewed you for the last interview about a year ago, since then we're relaunching our site. We're putting a lot of this stuff up on YouTube, and so I got a lot of these interviews I've done that are in the can that got to get up there. And when I posted the original interview I did with you the other night, a couple nights ago, Vince, who's the bass player from Ozmania, he hit that he liked your interview up on that I put up the other night, and through doing that, I hit Vince up, and I'm going to be interviewing him tomorrow, and I've interviewed a couple of other guys from Ozmania. So it's amazing just these interviews I've been doing, the hits that they've been getting.
Yes. They're not only are they extremely talented group, but working with them as people, they're wonderful, wonderful people also, and that's just so huge because they really truly are really good people.
Yeah, and let me ask you: do you know Oz? Okay, obviously you played with Ozmania. Or are they strictly like Oz? Do they strictly do Ozzy Osbourne material? Do they throw Sabbath material in there as well?
Oh, they do Sabbath.
Oh,
yes.
That's cool. That's cool. Okay.
But I think they just like to simplify it, calling it Ozzy, because it's basically anything that Ozzy does.
Yeah.
Whether it be Black Sabbath or or the solo material.
And I got to tell you, Gar, the name Gar Borras is coming synonymous with the other tribute bands, because I've seen people posting stuff on your site and stuff, and anybody I've ever talked to says, "Oh, Gar Borras, he's just a super talented, super nice guy." And so people are, and that's the cool thing about the tribute scene is, like I said, I post these interviews, and people from other tribute bands, they check the interviews out that their friends have done, and they comment on them, and they go on their other tribute band sites and they make comments. It seems like all the tribute bands are like one big happy fraternity, and you guys all help each other out.
Yes, and I mean, I really, that's why I just, through this whole thing, I get to meet all of these wonderful, wonderful people, and musicians have a very unique sense of humor, kind of warped sense of humor.
Yeah.
So, it's very easy for all of us to be comfortable around each other because we all think the same way.
Okay, well, Gar, I could talk to you all night, but it's getting late, so I'm going to let you go. And like I said, if you just shoot me your email through the Facebook page, I'll send you an interview in about an hour, so you can listen back to it. And
all good.
Once it gets posted, I'll let you know. Take care, my friend, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Jason.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.